We have always believed in Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, and this broad-mindedness, this accommodation is the quintessential identity of India.
Hi, I'm Shoma Chaudhary. Thanks for watching Inquiry. We're ending the year with a big double bill, the idea of India and the battle for belonging from two perspectives, the Congress and the BJP. This interview is with Vinay Sahasrabudhe, the chief of the ICCR and the former national vice president of the party. He's been running a big program on shifting the global understanding of India, and the questions I put to him is, what is his personal idea of India? What is the party's idea of India? And is there a gap between what they profess to be their philosophy and what they practice on ground? What is there to look forward to in 2021? Thank you very much for joining me, Vinayji.
I was also looking for this interaction because that provides me a platform to explain as to what exactly we are up to. So thank you so much.
So Vinayji, as head of ICCR, you've been very focused on this project of a global understanding of India to change perspective on India. So two questions. One, what is, personally speaking, what is the idea of India that you believe in? And secondly, what did you want to correct about the world's understanding of India?
At the ICCR, after I have taken over, we were trying to basically revisit the vision and mission statement. And it's not proper even to say revisit, because there was nothing like a vision and mission statement of this institution, because this was established in 1950. And at that point in time, the term soft power was not even in vogue. And therefore, after the world has drastically changed, we have seen the end of the Cold War, we have seen the new process of flattening of the world as described by Thomas Friedman. And therefore, we require to fine-tune the activities of ICCR along with the current trend of enhancing soft power. In that sense, I believe the major objective behind ICCR activities will have to be creating a proper understanding of India and the idea of India. I mean, both these things are inseparable in a way. And when I say the idea of India, in fact, we have mentioned it in our draft vision and mission statement that there are at least 5 things, if I may focus on them. First one, when you try to understand idea of India, it is India's spiritual democracy. When I say spiritual democracy, I mean our glorious tradition of disallowing any way of worship, of having any hegemony or monopoly for that matter. We have always believed in Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, and this broad-mindedness, this accommodation, spirit of accommodation, is the quintessential identity of India. Point number 1. The other point is the diversity in our lifestyles, in the way we conduct ourselves, which in fact is the manifestation, diverse manifestation of the innate oneness of the people of India. We are one, and the diversity is only the diverse manifestation of this oneness. Thirdly, the Gandhian philosophy of Antyodaya, where we bring the most deprived as the most deserving. And therefore, this element of social justice, which is inherent to the idea of Antyodaya, is the third main feature of the idea of India. The fourth one is the element of harmony of human life with Mother Nature. I mean, the world is discussing sustainability of late, but we know that we cannot, and we didn't have the idea of conquering our Mother Nature. We always believed in living in tune with Mother Nature. And that is the fourth one. And the fifth one is the centrality of our philosophy of world as a family, or Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. This is the idea of India. And I would, and for that matter, any other Indian also would certainly expect that the global community should look at India from these perspectives and not from whatever is being spread or being told by the media. And we know the foreign media itself has not adequate idea of the idea of India.
But this was a beautiful description, Vinayji, gladdens one's heart. So then, why is the political articulation of say, now speaking of you as the national vice president of the BJP, why does the political articulation of the idea of India from the BJP then seem so, divisive, or makes communities within India feel insecure? And very often it seems that there is a conflict between what one calls the liberals' idea of India and the Hindutva idea of India. But what you just articulated is I think no one can have any argument with that. So could you help me understand this, that why is the political articulation so different from what you just said?
Now, firstly, let me make it very clear that I am no more the vice president of BJP.
Of course,
Recently, there was a shift in the responsibilities. So a new team has already taken over, and therefore, if at all I am the ex-vice president of the BJP.
Right.
But insofar as your question is concerned, I think it is just a matter of misinterpretation. What BJP has been believing, what BJP constitution says, what BJP has been practicing also. You have seen our governance. You have seen the way we are talking about politics of development. We are talking about delivering the democracy. Tell me which party talks about politics of performance? It is only we. So we are committed to the idea of democracy, committed to the idea of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, and whatever we are doing is in tune with that.
So, when you were saying that, I'll come back to the sort of criticism or the sort of what I articulated as people who feel left out by the BJP. I'll come back to that. But before that, what did you want to correct about the idea of India? Because these things that you just said, the idea of India as being inclusive, plural, diversity, this wonderful and very crucial issue of living in tune with nature. These, in fact, are the core ideas of India. Why do you feel that needs correction? Or did you just want it reaffirmed?
No, reaffirm, of course. And at the same time, there are people who may have some vested interests or some other agendas to be pursued. But I know that India, as what I or you or any other Indian would desire, is not being seen the way it should be looked at, unfortunately. For example, 20 years back, Sushant Gunatilake, one of the very well-known social scientists from Sri Lanka, had written in a piece, and where he had said that how not just India, but the entire South Asia is being misperceived. And he had given an example of a California University seminar where the subject was the bride burning and son preference traditions in India. Can you think about this? Is this not misinterpretation? There are textbooks. We recently undertook a survey of textbooks from various countries, and we came across some textbooks where they say that Brahmanism is the other name of Hindutva. Is that correct? There are people who still believe in the Aryan invasion theory, which has been rubbished by a person no less than Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. But unfortunately, our own historians are still believing in something which has already been discarded. So, unfortunately, there are elements in our country who believe that India is not one country. They have written thesis, they have written dissertations saying that Chhattisgarh is a different nation and Jharkhand is a different nation. So our basically quarrel is with these elements who are out to ensure some kind of further vivisection of our motherland. And if you and me are not going to protect the unity and integrity of our country, who else?
Right. So when you say that there are these dissertations which have written of Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh as different nations, is it just in terms of the fact that tribal communities have their own distinct culture, like Veria Elvin and others have written, or there's no talk of it from India?
Basically, what we have been believing is that lifestyles may be different, our apparels are different, our eating habits are different, but essentially the core values are the same. And these values are binding us, which is why we are a nation. Right. Where is the question of tribal and non-tribal? You scan through several tribal languages and you will find that even in those languages, the sayings and proverbs are equally the same. I mean, of the same meaning for that matter. It was not that any government resolution was issued by some government at the time of Viceroy that there should be these kinds of sayings in every other language. But in Assamia or in Marathi or in Gujarati or in Santhal, you will find same meanings, same proverbs and sayings carrying the same shade of meaning. So our innate cultural unity is a fact, and we will have to appreciate that.
Right. So, Vinayji, just to persist with this theme for a little bit before we move elsewhere, that you remember there was Ramanujan's 300 Ramayans, and it's actually from the, the Ramayans in the south to Ramayans in tribal culture to different languages. There, the beauty of Ramayana, Mahabharata, all our epics is that they have been constantly evolving. They adapt to different cultures. But there was a lot of resistance to the 300 Ramayans, where there are different interpretations of Ravan or Sita being born. So they're different story traditions, but the main idea of the Ramayana, of course, is the same, but they're different traditions. But there was a big resistance from those who are now seen as Hindutva proponents to Ramanujan's 300 Ramayans. So when you're saying they're different cultures, this is what I meant. Why is the articulation so different in practice?
No, I don't know. I mean, this is an old controversy. I'm not aware what was the objection of those who might have objected.
But speaking for yourself, you feel that...
I won't be commenting upon that, because there are people who are distorting the things as well. They want to present a very distorted picture. A very perverted mind also works at times. As what I said about the seminar on bride burning and son preference traditions in India. If somebody is believing that this is the tradition in India, then I would say that I don't think he is from India or he is an Indian. Right. He just don't understand what India is about.
Yeah. So, I think what ends up happening is that, like I said, what your articulation of India was really gladdens one's heart. But, in the new education policy, and you're very involved with the Committee on Education also, there are two phrases which are used, which is critical thinking and free inquiry. Again, very, very important aspects of education. So bride burning and preference for sons, we have had female infanticide in the country. It's something we would all want to combat.
These are not traditions, ma'am. These are aberrations. Right. When you are presenting aberrations and traditions, you are perverting, you are distorting. Right. And that shows some kind of a design when you use these terminologies. It's a politics, ma'am. I'm sorry to say.
No, I think that's an important phrase you used, between a tradition and an aberration, or something that you want to fix, for sure. So when you were speaking about the idea of India and the spiritual democracy, this capacity to take many cultures, I wanted to ask you, where in the tradition does the BJP see the role of Muslims in India, the Muslim past as well as the Muslim present? There is a sense, when in political life, there's denigration of, say, biryani, of Urdu. The moment people protest, they're told to go back to Pakistan. So there's this constant sort of sense that Muslims don't quite belong to India. What would you say to that? What officially do you feel is the position of Muslims in India?
Well, BJP and all of us have been very clear about it, that they are as much a part of the Indian people as what any other section is. And therefore, there is absolutely no doubt about it. And we want them to be, which is why our government came and rushed to the rescue of Muslim women, and we brought the anti-triple talaq bill. Tell me, those who are singing paeans about Muslims and minorities, why didn't they do that? So your question should be addressed to them. We are in fact wanting Muslims to be seen as our very own brethren. And that is why we have sensitivity towards them.
Right. Well, I have actually questioned both Asauddin Owaisi and the Congress about triple talaq. So that's, one questions different people differently. But coming back to, sir, the questions I asked about this kind of, othering of biryani, Urdu, go to Pakistan, that kind of language.
Every state ruled by BJP is having a Urdu academy, Urdu development board. Whatever was there is it continuing, and we are promoting. Every other language is an Indian language, so why not Urdu? So we don't have any other view about Urdu for that matter. But of course, no language certainly can be progressing at the cost of any other language. That is the simple point which we want to make, if at all we have to, at times. Because there are issues wherein some people try to affiliate a particular language to a particular religious group. We don't. So we would like Urdu to be flourished, to be promoted, to be used adequately. So we don't have any quarrel about that. Certainly not about biryani. Absolutely not.
Right. So it's good to hear it coming from someone who's very, very senior in the BJP, because that puts an official stamp to that. So also speaking about the Muslim past, because that's a big bone of contention. Do you, speaking of yourself as an intellectual, see it only as a period of invasion and destruction, or do you also see it as a period of amalgamation and expansion? You know, that kind of confluence of culture out of which new and modern cultures are built.
Well, see, everything has certain good things, certain bad things. And it has to be looked at with equanimity. And you cannot simply portray the good part or portray the bad part. So history as what it is, it's a fact of life, and we have to accept that. Therefore, we don't have any quarrel. Point is that in our several textbooks and in our narratives also, only medieval past is being projected as India's history. In fact, that has reflected in several other countries' textbooks where the references to India only start from the medieval ages. In fact, civilization over here, our civilizational journey had started maybe thousands of years before.
Right.
But if you are wanting me to forget that, forget Harshavardhan, forget Samudragupta, and only remember whatever the rulers during the last 300 years, then it's definitely a distortion. You are not doing justice. That is our only contention, nothing more than that.
Okay. So just to stick with this a little bit longer before, and you'll forgive me for pressing it, it's an important opportunity for clarifying things, that, there's this kind of spree of now renaming cities. It happened in Hyderabad. There's also the constant attachment of the word jihad. It was Corona jihad, it becomes love jihad. Like I said, there's a political articulation which others Muslims, separate from what you are saying or the reasoned positions that you are taking. So I would ask you to, just elaborate on that why is there this distinction between political articulation and philosophy of the BJP or Hindutva as a party?
See, you must appreciate the global trend as well. Peking was reverted back to Beijing. Why? Because going back to the roots is a global trend. It is not you and me only are struggling with this situation. Identity is an important issue. You cannot deny that. Why Trivandrum suddenly became Thiruvananthapuram? And why didn't these issues were raised at that point of time? But since no Islamic or Muslim reference was attached to that, they were ignored. Why Bombay was made Mumbai? That is the original. So our path, our journey is to revisit the original, which is why Allahabad becomes Prayagraj. What is wrong in that? I mean, why should one be shy of it? It doesn't mean that we are denigrating any ruler over here. We still have Akbar Road here.
Right.
We have Dara Shikoh Road as well. What is wrong in that? It is the people who decide.
Okay. So, and this question I asked you about love jihad, Corona jihad, the constant use of words which are politically charged. And on the love jihad issue, because
I don't know who used this term Corona jihad. At least BJP has never used this term.
Well,
I cannot comment on this because we never use this term.
Okay, I have to admit a gap in my knowledge of actually pinpointing which particular minister or leader did it. Certainly the media did it, but I'll admit to a gap in my knowledge of, actually specifying which leader used that term.
Media has many super intellectuals, so I cannot comment on them. They may be using several terms for no reason whatsoever. But we certainly didn't use this term. Absolutely.
Okay.
And love jihad is not a term which we invented. It was there in practice, and some people are using it.
No, so this love jihad factor, Vinayji, because like I said, as an intellectually interested in facts, that there's no large statistic of mass conversions. These are adult citizens making consenting choices, and the penal code already exists for any situation where there's coercion. But when one frames such a draconian law that you go 10 years into prison, we've already heard reports of legitimate couples being parted by force, by extra constitutional forces, groups of hooligans. So is this not a cause for concern? Don't you feel that this is an exaggeration of inter-community marriages?
See, a democratically elected government, when gets certain certain intelligences and certain information, certain inputs from the people, in their own wisdom, they try to formulate a law to prevent a particular thing from happening. That is what has happened in Uttar Pradesh, and perhaps is being given some shape in Madhya Pradesh also. So, and the courts are already in the process of scrutinizing these legislations. So let's wait for them.
Okay, but speaking for yourself, are you comfortable with laws which outlaw inter-community marriages?
No, certainly not. There is no question about preventing. See, the law doesn't prevent an inter-community marriage. The law only says, as I understand within the limited knowledge that I have, that it only says that simply because of marriage, it's somebody, any of the partner, not just husband pressurizing the wife, it could be other way around also. If somebody is pressurizing somebody for the sake of marriage to get converted against the desire of the person concerned, then it is prevented. That's it. Nothing more.
Right.
They're not preventing such marriages. Forced conversions are being prevented, and they are anyway prevented. But unfortunately,
there are the provisions of law.
Unfortunately, under the guise of kind of a love marriage, these things are perhaps given a different color, which is why that particular issue is being dealt with. Nothing more than that.
Right. There have been disturbing cases where, women have said that we are adult consenting, we have agreed to marry, we have agreed to change our religion, and they've still been forcibly separated, or their husbands have been jailed. And then they're put through the trauma of going through the court process before justice is served again, So it just seems like
no, I mean, since, as you rightly said, there is no statistics to support, according to certain sources, but there is statistics also to support that there are some, I mean, of these marriages where some kind of a love element was there behind the interfaith marriage. And then how many such marriages have unfortunately met with some kind of a mishap also requires to be looked into. I would only put this much as a student of social science and nothing more than that.
Yeah. No, that's a fair thing, sir, that if there was an evidence-based law, then Correct. No one would have an opposition to it. Coming back, sir, to that important thing I said about, that the new education policy, it has a very interesting framework. Key attempt is to de-Macaulay education, decolonize the brain. Also, there are many aspects to it, reduce pressure on students, but most important, critical thinking and inquiry. So I would like to ask you, again, this atmosphere that there's been of a kind of pushback on certain universities, like the JNU University, Jamia University, Aligarh Muslim University, in particular, Hyderabad University. So again, where if there sort of some streams of thinking when those universities don't fit with the dominant political narrative of the day, then entire universities are kind of, blackened. Their reputations are blackened. Are you disturbed by that? As, I see you as, of course, a leader of the party, but also an intellectual in your own right.
Let me tell you that we are not here to denigrate any particular university. We don't want to. In fact, we have given some of the most efficient vice chancellors to these universities, like what you see in JNU for that matter, and several other universities. Only thing is that if there is an element of some kind of a bad publicity or some kind of a bad name being given In fact, we have been at the receiving end all these years. Who were denigrated as communalists and who were denigrated as anti-secularism? We. So we know how people are using politics through media, through intelligentsia, through academia, trying to corner somebody, trying to paint somebody. Some entire ideological movement is being tarnished. We know that, and therefore we understand the pain that gets involved in this kind of a process of tarnishing the image or politics of calumny for that matter. And therefore we are not, we are at the receiving end. We don't indulge in such things. In fact, we celebrate differences of opinion. It was Mr. Advani who went and offered his tributes to Mr. E.M.S. Namboodiripad as the first thing what he did as Deputy Prime Minister after taking over. So we celebrate. We have good friends. Dattopant Thengdi was in the Communist Party earlier. He was a member of the Communist trade unions. So we definitely appreciate differences of opinion. We celebrate them. Politics of shutting the voice or politics of disallowing anybody from speaking is not our tradition. It is somebody else's.
I would heartily agree that is not the Indian tradition at all, not the Hindu tradition. But again, in practice, there are disturbing incidents, Vinayji, and I would love you to be honest in assessing them. For instance,
I would love you to be honestly asking these questions to all others, those who are indulging in these kinds of things.
I do. By the way,
selectively trying to be a proponent of this kind of free speech and all other things. We are all for free speech, beyond doubt. We waged war against emergency.
I'm going to come to that. But in fact, Vinayji, if you remember, I did ask for an interview which would have someone from the Congress as well, because when I do interviews with the Congress, one questions them, with a lot of, I hope, equal pressure as one would like to ask questions of you. And if both sides could come together, one would be able to have that healthy debate. But unfortunately, now this tradition of debate, in fact, one of the best things about India, Adi Shankaracharya's big debate with Mandan Mishra, that's the tradition we are proud of. But today, very few people actually want to come together in intellectual debate. So forgive me if right now it seems as if I'm putting questions only to you because the Congress is missing or left traditions are missing. But I do question them.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Go ahead.
Okay. So I was just asking you that as a veteran political leader, will you at least be honest in admitting that when people like Anurag Thakur and Kapil Mishra and others have been visibly on record just calling protesters anti-nationals, desh ki gaddaro ko, goli maro salo ko, this kind of vocabulary certainly makes it seem that protesters are inherently anti-national. In your personal capacity and your official capacity, are you uncomfortable with that? Would you condemn it?
I'll only respond to that in our party, there is a way of dealing with the things. When some mistake has happened by some member of our party, may he be a member of parliament or anybody else, then there are ways of making him or her aware of the mistake and then have the correction also reflected in his conduct. And we take care of this. I was the vice president of the party, and one of our members of parliament, I will not take the name, from Uttar Pradesh, had articulated certain things in a very unfit manner. So I was asked to go meet with him and serve him a show cause notice. I did that. But these things we need not publicize because these are in a way things within a family. If somebody commits a mistake in our own family, we don't reprimand him or her publicly. But it doesn't mean that everybody goes scot-free.
Right.
I will limit myself only to this.
Even that is reassuring coming from you. But, in fact, Mohan Bhagwat ji, when he addressed, when he made his address in Vigyan Bhavan, he had said that there can be no India without Muslims, and he said it very categorically. And Ram Madhav wrote a very interesting piece then saying, this is RSS glasnost, and he used that phrase. So will you at least say that having come to power, there's a nuancing and a repositioning of your ideology and your thinking around Muslims? Is it becoming more center, more softer? Is it a glasnost new phase of how you see Muslims? Will we see a softer phase?
Well, I'm too junior a person to comment upon whatever Sir Sangachalakji has said. But as a Swayamsevak who has been ingrained in the ideology of RSS and the BJP, I know that never ever in shakhas or in our training programs or within any kind of political or other discourses where we taught to look at any community, not just Muslims, but there are other communities also, as other into inverted commas. So we consider them as integral part of India. And the same feeling, I believe, was voiced by Honorable Bhagwatji.
Okay. So last question on this before we move away, that recently in Karnataka, minister said on record that we will give no tickets to Muslims. Typically, if you look at the percentages, you're a student of social science, that when you look at the BJP party across the board, almost no tickets are given to Muslim candidates. And there's very tiny representation of Muslims within the party or in parliament. So is that not a break in what you are saying is your ideology and your thinking, and how it is played out in practice and how people experience the party?
No, there are several Muslim leaders in the party. There are several Muslim members of parliament in the Rajya Sabha, MLAs. There were ministers in Rajasthan and some other states also. But I think that need not be the only thermometer of judging how secular we are or how accommodative we are, because after all, electoral representation is a different ball game, and wherever people are likely to get elected, get prominence. So in the process, at times, it may happen. But there are municipalities in Gujarat, I know, where the majority of the members of that particular municipality belonging to BJP are Muslims. So I don't think that should be the way to rush to draw the conclusion.
Fine. I wanted to come to this, the quarrels over history that very often explode in public conversation and public debate. In that, sir, there is definitely a need for renaissance, and I wish the coming of the BJP would create that interest in some wonderful aspects of, Indian civilization, knowledge seeking, science, many accomplishments in music and literature. There's huge space for that. But typically, it's either, again, articulated as revenge, or it is sometimes seen as wanting to freeze the past. It's like just looking back to a golden past rather than keeping that spirit of inquiry right now. So we've in fact had Education Minister of Rajasthan and Gujarat and elsewhere, talking about plastic surgery 4,000 years ago, or the fact that cows exhale oxygen rather than methane. So, there's a kind of absence of intellectualism, which is very disturbing. So, would you want to course correct some of that?
No. I think this is again a classic case of rushing to draw conclusion. You have branded that this is absence of intellectualism, but perhaps maybe ignorance is at the other side. Are you aware that when I spoke in the parliament about a bill on Ayurveda, I referred to the fashion, and it has become a fashion to denigrate cow dung and gomutra and things like that. But there is a well-established gomutra therapy. And a person no less than Oscar Fernandez, a very, very senior and respected member of Congress party who was from the other side to speak immediately after me, he said, I myself was a victim of cancer and I got treated with the help of gomutra and I'm now hale and hearty. So there are evidences. Scientists like Mr. Mashelkar, he has spoken about the relevance of gomutra and how it has medicinal value. But if you have decided that no, gomutra, gobar, goma, everything is to be rubbish, then you are going to think in that fashion. This is in fact intellectually dishonest kind of behavior.
No, in fact, so speaking for myself personally.
No, I'm not talking about you. I'm saying since you rush to draw a conclusion and refer that this is anti-intellectualism, I'm just very politely trying to bring it to your notice that it is not. In fact, intellectual work has already happened. You visit the All India Institute of Ayurveda here. You know All India Institute of Medical Sciences. But perhaps you may not be aware that an equally powerful institution for Ayurveda is working right in the boundaries of Delhi NCR. And they have wonderful research. They treated more than 500 corona patients, not a single casualty. But these things may not reach up to you.
No, see, sir, I think the prominence that you're saying that to give these traditions, Ayurveda, yoga, like I said, they are fantastic knowledge traditions in India. And in fact, our whole way of looking at health is a conversation between the body and the nature. It's a dialogue, whereas Western traditions look at the body in isolation. So these are very, very interesting and important distinctions. But I was saying about Renaissance, that's why I use the word Renaissance, that we in fact bring prominence to this knowledge around it, increase the rigor around that knowledge also, presentation of that knowledge. But I was talking, when I said anti-intellectual, about the minister who said that cows exhale oxygen and not methane.
But why do you pick and choose one particular statement from a minister and make me answer to that? Why should I? There is a huge knowledge tradition. Tell me, everything appears in Lancet. But Ayurveda is not allowed to present their papers in Lancet. But the global community considers that the wisdom is only in the Lancet. Now, whose narrow-minded is this? So,
Right.
some kind of a turning the searchlight inward is also perhaps needed.
No, on that I have no argument, sir. The rich traditions of Ayurveda or of Vedantic thought, today even cosmologically, astrophysics, quantum physics, there's a lot of interesting parallels between the idea of the Brahman and the cosmos and what physics is exploring. So I don't have argument with that at all. But it's about, maybe you're saying, the extreme end of how it is articulated. It seems anti-intellectual.
Aberrations are always there. That does not make that is the rule. There are aberrations. Ignore them.
Okay. So coming to, you mentioned about emergency. You have used a very interesting phrase for yourself as a trainer in democracy, and that you have been interested in the functions of democracy. In your book, you also wrote about how India has been triumphant in protecting certain civic institutions. So speaking as a trainer in democracy, today when a lot of people, the moment they protest, there are cases of sedition, UAPA, declared as urban Nakshals, anti-nationals. There's a language of denigrating or of othering those who are not in agreement. So how comfortable are you with the quality of democracy as it is today? I will again not go into what it was in the Congress regime because there are enough bad examples there, but just taking responsibility for your own government. Are you comfortable about the quality of democracy under your government?
See, one thing you must understand, I mean, all of us perhaps need to understand, is that there is a change in the narrative post, I would say, 1990s. And there is a kind of newfound confidence, which is why nationalism is being seen on the rise. It was not for no reason that Mr. Sharad Pawar, who had earlier defected from the Congress and named his party as Socialist Congress in the 80s, in the 90s, late 90s, when he again defected, he named his party as Nationalist Congress Party, because he saw that the market is that of nationalism. The point I'm trying to make is that people are more nationalistic today in their approach, in their thinking, and therefore integrationistic also, which is a good thing for any country. In such an atmosphere, if somebody is saying that Bharat tere tukde honge, would you want the law to ignore them, to allow them to go scot-free? I don't think. And therefore, those who are seeing the dream of further vivisection of India, our constitution doesn't allow that. So the constitutional machinery is taking its own course. Now in public narrative, somebody is saying that this is a tukde gang. I don't think it is far from the facts.
So like you were pushing back on, isolated incidents that I may be quoting to you and asking your opinion on, that particular controversy around Kanhaiya Kumar and JNU, it eventually got proved that video of him apparently saying tukde was a false video, so even,
Let it be established in the court of law.
yeah, I think it has been established.
No, I don't think so. Then he would have been freed and he would have been decorated by this time.
Even he is free. He
No,
is free.
he may
But
be free, but not free from all the charges that are against him.
right. So just to stay with this about the democracy, and then I'll come to the bigger picture, but I'm picking some of these because it would be a lost opportunity not to ask you those questions. But, for instance, someone like Harsh Mandir, who has been an apostle of peace, he may be opposed to particular ideologies or what people perceive as Hindutva ideology, or Dr. Kafil Khan, their records have been there about what they said in public, and now both the courts have also exonerated Kafil Khan, for instance. But again, they were just seen as protesters, maybe critics of the government, and they were immediately declared as anti-national and sedition. That's a very, very big law to invoke against people. So do you know of these cases, and would you have a view on the matter on that?
Frankly speaking, I mean, all these cases have already been discussed in the media, and there are strong opinions on both the sides. And therefore, it is for the courts of law to give a judgment. And we will follow that. But of course, the government or those who are definitely leveling some allegations against them, and then the law is taking its own course, there must be some reason. It is not that somebody is for any kind of personal enmity, something is being done. Certainly not. So let's wait.
Right. So I come back to that question when you said about a trainer in democracy. You yourself personally were imprisoned during the emergency. You spent 45 days in jail. But both as a student and then later, in the course of your public life, you have been part of very robust protests, including the protesters in Assam, elsewhere. So this coming out on the streets, and in fact, some of those protests were not peaceful. They were disruptive. The whole point of protest is spectacle. It's to grab attention. It is to force someone's hand. Do you feel that now at least there is a hypocrisy on that count? Because when protests happen now, they're immediately seen as the hand of others. If it's disruptive, then it's seen as anti-national, even if they are by and large peaceful. What is your position on protests, sir?
Well, basically, BJP party as such, we are not there to paint any particular or every other protest with a particular brush. That we have never done. At certain points, if we have our spokespersons might have said something, there must be some reason behind that. It is not without any reason. And you are seeing that destructive elements are there, even in some of the agitations which are going on at this juncture. So I don't want to call them names, but if some of our party persons are making some observations, I don't have any reason to disbelieve them. But in general, in democracy, protest and all the opposition voice or the other voice certainly has a place of prominence that goes without doubt. I mean, the very grain of democracy has this element beyond doubt. And we always have been struggling to find that space when we were in opposition, and we are allowing, or we are rather respecting the opposition voices beyond doubt. Usme koi sandeh nahi, no problem.
So the one thing I appreciate is that you are articulating a very inclusive idea in what you are saying. But I would really appreciate it if you were a little more self-introspective and honest in your assessment of how it is experienced in practice. So, of course, individually one can always. This is what the previous governments have done, hiding behind the course of law. But there's also, like, you're so clear about your ideology, then one in fact is looking for that difference, that people will really have a moral compass in public life. When something is wrong, if your own government is doing something wrong, that there will be pressure within to not move away. If you're saying the core idea of Hinduism is openness, amalgamation, diversity, plurality, self-confidence, then one should not have so many bad examples in practice. No? Would you agree?
Well, at any point of time, there should not be bad examples. That goes without saying. And I don't think, I mean, the way you are describing, or you are, selectively referring to certain examples, maybe that is your view, and I respect your view, no doubt about it. But there are other views also. And after all, a democratically elected government with such a huge mandate, if tries to do something after due diligence and some homework done, and insofar as several other things. I mean, see, basically painting a particular thing in a particular way also is not free from prejudices. If we did away with Article 370, is it not a fact that the Constitution had provided for that? But those who are now talking, at length about Constitution will continue to assail us, will continue to say, oh, this is wrong, you are playing with Constitution. But that media will ignore. Many media persons, and I myself was a media person, and I have good friends in the media, but unfortunately, they indulge in a politics of vocabulary. When we people take to streets, we are called as hordes. And when people with red flags come to the streets, they are called as masses. Is it not politics? Do you want us to be fooled to not to see the political distinction between that? There is a politics. So it's not that the political discourse, if at all, as you rightly pointed out earlier, is vitiated. There is a history to that, ma'am.
Right. But one always looks to leaders to change
Of course. And the change will happen.
The same society.
One will have to be a little patient as well.
And here I'm just now doing a conversation with you rather than asking you a question, but my understanding of leadership is that you can set a very idealistic framework and people respond to that. The same society can be brutal, hate-filled, or it can be idealism and open and plural. It really depends on the framework a leadership places on that society.
See, having now realized that you had this perhaps very genuine, I don't want to doubt your genuineness, concern about the sustenance of pluralism, rest assured, Indian society is plural, was plural, will continue to be plural, because pluralism is the other name of Hindutva, which is why we say spiritual democracy. Tell me any other person from any other ideological group, did he ever use the term which I am using? No, because they don't believe in spiritualism at all. Their atheism and so-called intellectualism starts with that. I don't have a quarrel with that. Even that has been accommodated.
We have great tradition of the Karvakas. And
that is what I am saying. So we don't have any quarrel with that. Point is, you must accept that here is the land where we not only write it on the wall of parliament, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti, but we believe in it and we ensure that it reflects in our conduct.
Right. So, okay. I was just, if you have 2 more minutes, I'll just ask one more question. That in your conception of education in India, speaking for yourself, you have spoken of the idea of Rabindranath Tagore and Shantiniketan, the idea of a dialogue between other traditions, Western traditions, and Hindu traditions or Indian traditions, the whole gamut. But again, sir, over there, is there a gap? Will you accept that there's a gap in this openness today, not to the West, we have enough of that, but say anything that comes from, again, if it comes from any Muslim origin, there is a need to isolate it or separate it and say that this is not part of what is intrinsically India. And that also got reflected in the anxiety people faced during the CAA, because while all other religions were named, only Islam was not named as being inherently like India is not the home of Islam, So what is your view on that?
Well, it's a fact that India is not the home of Islam. Will Islamists appreciate that Islam originated in India? It is unhistorical to say so. Right. So what's wrong in putting the facts together?
But the CAA allowed even Christians to come.
Because they are persecuted, ma'am.
But you have Muslims also who are persecuted in Muslim countries.
But if we say so, all our Islamic countries will take objection to that. And we don't want to jeopardize our external relations with our countries, I mean, with neighboring countries. How can a country which is avowedly Islamic Republic will do any injustice to the adherent of Islam? They just cannot.
That is like saying that there is no persecution of, say, Dalits in India. There is, that does not mean that this country is so good to.
No, we are not saying that is besides the point, ma'am. The legislation is only about kind of short-circuiting the process of giving citizenship to those who are persecuted. All others, even Muslims can get citizenship of India. Who is preventing them? They will have to wait for 12 years. Others can come because they are persecuted. What is wrong in it? It is one of the most humanitarian legislations. But
so my last question.
Jaundiced view about that creates a misperception, and a particular narrative with an agenda is being run, which is why misperception takes place, unfortunately.
So, Vinayji, sadly, if I would pursue the questions for clarity, you'll feel it's confrontational, but I'm actually seeking clarity. But, the point is the way things are articulated matters very much, Vinayji. If it is like even the Ram Mandir, if it is articulated as a correction, a civilizational correction, rather than an act of dominance, the whole atmosphere would be different. Similarly, with the CAA, when it comes on the back of what happened in Assam, the moment there were a lot of Hindus that were also caught, in the NRC, the same government goes back and wants to redo the exercise. There was that language of inke kapde se pata chalta hai. So there's an atmosphere of fear and alienation that is created, sir, which is different from what you are describing to be the intention. So would you at least accept that going forward, starting on a new year, that if the intention really is to make people feel included, then the articulation can become, and you have master orators in your party, that the articulation can match the intention?
Well, I think even to say that I'm here, or some party is here, or some government is here to make people feel included is very patronizing. It's very condescending. People feel included, beyond doubt. The kinds of imaginary fears that are being discussed in the media, in reality, there are no fears. Everybody is in a perfect kind of sense of brotherhood, fraternity, fellow feeling. So it is there. It is the spirit of India. And therefore, please don't needlessly worry about that. It will continue to be there. No power on the earth can break this essential innate integrity, oneness of Indian people. We are here to create a new India, or rather shape a new India, where we believe that the aspirational people of India are now a force which cannot be stopped by anyone. There are no full stops in India.
I will quote you chapter and book the next time there's any illiberalism or any absence of democracy by the BJP. Thank you very much for putting all of that on record. Thank you.